Again, I welcome every one of you attending this session today. My name is Baljinder Gill. I am the Community Training and Outreach Coordinator with Legal Aid BC. Along with me in today's session is Alessia Mordini and Sarah Chow. They both are helping with this session, actually running this session. There will be a survey at the end of this session, which will be sent to you. Please fill out that survey as we need your feedback. Feedback is very important for us as we have changed our trainings this year from in-person to Zoom trainings. It's very important for us to know what works and what not work so that we can generate our sessions in future according to your needs. So please fill out the survey, and there is a prize associated with the survey. So there will be a draw. We will take the draw out and send the prize to the winner via mail. So please fill out that survey, and all the questions will be going in Q&A box, and we will be monitoring that box. I will be asking the questions from Kamaljeet whenever it's good time to interrupt her. And at this note, I will introduce you to our wonderful speaker today, Kamaljeet Kaur Lihal. Kamaljeet Lihal earned her law degree from University of British Columbia in 1989 and was called to the bar in 1990. Since then, she is practicing in the areas of immigration, personal injury, and work-safe appeals. She's a certified civil and family law mediator. She has a strong interest in advocating some of the most vulnerable people in community, such as immigrant women fleeing prosecution and violence. She is actively working in advocating for policy and legal reform to ensure the safety of women. So please welcome Kamaljeet Kaur Lihal. Thank you, Kamaljeet, for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I also wanted to just take a moment and acknowledge that I'm speaking here today from North Delta, the unceded territories and lands of the Tsawwassen First Nations people and the Coast Salish people. So thank you for having me here today. And I apologize in advance. I have 3 screens, and if I'm not looking directly at you, please don't mind. And I'm just going to get my PowerPoint up here.
Oh, there we go. Looks good.
Sorry, everyone. There's, like I said, I've got 3 screens open here, and just apparently there's a presenter mode. There's a mode that's better for you all to see. So I'm really excited to hear that there's a large audience here today for this very important topic. And I'm sure you're all aware of this, that during the pandemic, we've seen a 300% increase in the rise of reports regarding domestic violence, which is, we all know before the pandemic, we had an epidemic of domestic violence issues. And during the pandemic, with the lockdown measures and people being forced to be in confines together, we saw sort of a pressure cooker scenario where there was a huge excel in the number of reportings. And I know that being on the board of one of the community organizations, we had to struggle to find placements in hotel rooms for women. And it's just a very challenging time for sure. My focus today, though, I first wanted to acknowledge that, that is going on, and you as frontline workers are dealing with even more challenging scenarios. And so, but my focus today is on immigrant women who are either out of status or who have precarious status, and what can we do to help these women? So we know this, before I jump into that, we know that women who are leaving a relationship of violence, there's so many hoops and hurdles for them to jump and systems to navigate. If there's criminal charges laid, they have the criminal justice system. If there's children involved, or even if there's not children involved and they have to go through divorce, there's a family court system. And if there's risk to the safety of the children, Ministry of Children and Families. And then through that, hopefully there's support from victim support services, and we have the support of transition homes, and support services. But there's so many routes that this woman is expected to navigate. And I just want to also pause ahead of time and say, when I give my presentations, I do say women. I do acknowledge that there are incidents of violence against men and others, but even the highest court of Canada has recognized that domestic violence has a face, and that face is a woman, and that the statistics, whether they're statistics coming from coroners or otherwise through Statistics Canada, show that predominantly it is women, young girls that are the main individuals that are victims. So when I give my presentations, I say, I speak on from the perspective of a woman. So we see the number of systems here, and these are just a few that women have to navigate. So if you're talking about an immigrant woman and an immigrant woman having to navigate the system, it becomes even more complex. For the most part, we have within immigration a number of silos. We have the department that accepts applications from people so that they can get status in Canada, and then you have a department which comes under the Ministry of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, which deals with removals of people who don't have status, and that's what we commonly know them as the CBSA, Canada Border Service agents that we see when we are at an airport or a port of entry. So you've got these systems working under different mandates under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. And when you have a woman who has no status or precarious status, we have to be really vigilant in how we help them navigate to getting to safety. So I want to sort of, I guess, paint the picture of how does a woman become out of status? How is, what do I mean when I say precarious status? So a typical scenario that I've seen over the years, and I've been doing this for over 30 years now, is that a woman does enter Canada with proper legal status, but loses it subsequent to arriving in Canada. And usually the scenario is that she ends up in a relationship with someone in Canada. She's given promises that, the person is either going to marry her or sponsor her. And she believes that, okay, well, I'm in this relationship, this person's going to sponsor me, and she doesn't do anything about her own status. She thinks that she's okay. She loses her status, she becomes out of status. And then there's those who are precarious status. They may be here on visitor visa, but they're in that abusive relationship, and they're afraid, they're told by their spouse if they report their abuse that their status can be taken away. So that power is wielded over them in terms of their status, so they never report the abuse, and they may continue to extend their visitor status, but it's kind of precarious because being able to stay in Canada, it's kind of contingent on what they believe is that they can't report the abuse, otherwise their status may be taken away. So how do we help these women when they are in these situations? So again, just a little bit more into what I mean by the control by the abusive spouse. So again, typical scenario again is someone believing that the partner or spouse is going to sponsor them to Canada, so they don't do anything about their own status. And what that is a family class application, spousal application, which the Canadian either permanent resident or Canadian citizen would file to sponsor the spouse to then get permanent resident status in Canada. So many times they're told that the application is underway, and it may be underway, but they're told that the application is going to be withdrawn if they report the abuse. And what does that mean? If an application is withdrawn, it's done, it's finished. And it can occur anytime up until a decision is made by an immigration officer. So, here's an individual who's relying on a spousal application and being abused, and told by the spouse, I can take this back anytime. And that is true. That withdrawal of a spousal application can occur anytime up until a decision is made by an immigration officer. So a lot of control is wielded over the victim. And I just want to say, if there's any questions as I do the presentation, I know it's Monday morning. People are just sort of waking up on the weekend, and I don't want to be talking at people. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer as we go along. It's going to be a lot of information that I am sharing with you today. So what are the legal options available to women who have no status in Canada or who have precarious status? How do we help them navigate? So there's two options available. One will give them temporary status, the ability to sort of get some status in Canada and not be removable from Canada. So that's a temporary resident permit, what I will be referring to throughout the presentation as a TRP. The second is a humanitarian and compassionate application. This is what I will refer to as an H&C application. This application allows a woman to obtain permanent resident status in Canada. So I'm going to talk a bit about the what I'm calling the expedited TRP process, but I'm just going to jump back for 1 second here. So before July 2019, these applications were always there. The TRP application was always there, and H&C application was always there. But the TRP applications could take a fairly lengthy time, anywhere from 6 to 9 months, 12 months to get that status. And right now, in the midst of a pandemic, taking even longer. This is a normal TRP. So someone who doesn't have status in the country always had the ability to apply and say, can I get temporary resident permit? But they had to have some extenuating circumstances, special grounds for an officer to grant that. And abusive circumstances could be considered as sufficient grounds to grant a TRP, but it would take a long time. Likewise, humanitarian H&C applications pre-July 2019, you were looking at upwards to 2 years to get that status secured. In July of 2019, and I would say it was after 10 years of advocacy by stakeholders, including myself, Eva BC, a number of other stakeholders, where we were requesting that the processes be expedited, that an expedited process was actually established. So I'm going to go into the expedited TRP process.
Kamaljeet, before you go in there, there is a question.
Sure.
Somebody asked that, what about women who are on work permit?
If they're on work permit, they have status in Canada. So the idea of a TRP is to get you some status that you don't have. So if you're on a work permit, you can continue to work. But if you're being abused and you want to stay in the country while you're working, you can then apply for the H&C application to get you that permanent status. The idea behind the TRP is to get those women that have no status in the country and are subject to being removed by CBSA. Remember, I spoke earlier about the different departments having different mandates, and the mandate of the CBSA is if someone is removable, to get a removal order and remove them as quick as possible from the country. So someone with a work permit status has the ability to remain in the country and continue to work while they pursue, if they choose to want to remain in the country permanently, an H&C application as one option. It may be if they're on a work permit and they work in a high skilled job, that they can apply for PR status on that basis as well. Is that okay, Baljinder?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. So let's look at the expedited TRP process. What does this mean? What's the eligibility requirements? How do we go about using this process for women who are out of status? So if you have status, this is not a process currently that you're able to use. It's for women that are out of status. So like I said July, but it's actually June 2019, an expedited TR process was announced for individuals fleeing family violence. And one good thing about this is there is no fee for the TRP application for this particular expedited TRP. And the other good plus, I guess, about this process is that women can simultaneously apply for an open work permit, and there's no fee for that either. These files are coded. They are marked with the initials FV. I just want to pause and say I'm really proud of this coding because that was my own personal contribution to this process. I always have been advocating that we have an economic sector in immigration, and there's ways that immigration has allowed for flagging economic files for fast processing. I believe it used to be in the PNP class. It was a green sticker that would go on a file because the province really needed that worker desperately for work in that province. And so that file would be pulled out and fast-tracked. So my argument was always, well, why can't we have a similar flagging process for victims of violence? So, and they asked me, what would you suggest other than a sticker? So I had suggested EFV, Expedited Family Violence. So they took the FV. So my personal little contribution, but those little initials there will make the world of difference in getting these files flagged and processed. So who can be eligible? Who is eligible to make use of these TRPs? Key requirement, the woman must be physically located in Canada and experiencing abuse. So someone who's in Canada. Second eligibility requirement is that she is seeking permanent resident status, which is contingent upon remaining in a genuine relationship in which there is abuse, and the relationship is critical for the continuation of her status in Canada. So this is what I spoke about before, that these women end up in these relationships where they're told that there's a spousal application underway or the person's going to sponsor them. And so their ability to get PR status is dependent on this individual who's abusing them. And they need to remain in that relationship, or, you know, it was a genuine relationship to get PR status. So that's a criteria, that they are seeking PR status that's contingent upon remaining in a genuine relationship. So this is, I'm not going to read all of this, but I wanted to put it here so that you guys, I believe, will have access to my PowerPoints. And it's just describing different ways that individuals can become eligible, different scenarios. So a person is already an applicant in a spousal application, that's scenario one. Or they were part of a spousal application and the sponsor withdrew the application. Or they were misled to believe that an application would be made, or they're temporary residents intending to apply for PR status. So these are the type of scenarios that are being recognized as being a basis for eligibility to make an expedited TRP application. Another important point, so I kept this bullet separate, is that dependent foreign national children of victims of violence, both must be in Canada, so I just highlight that, are also eligible for a family violence TRP. So that puts the children in status.
Hi, Kamaljeet. There are two questions for you.
Sure.
The first one is, if I am a permanent resident, will these rules be same for me? And the second one is, would this be available for a male that may be abused by family that is sponsoring them too?
Yeah, so I'll deal with the latter one first. So yeah, it is available for men or women. Like I said at the beginning of my presentation, my focus is always on women, but yes, any man who is abused likewise has the ability to access this process as well. As to the second question regarding PR status, if you're already on PR status, then no, you would not be eligible. This is for people who are out of status. As a PR, you're eligible for all the resources that Canada has to offer. So if you need victim support or social assistance or whatever else you need to get to safety, you would use the normal resources that are available. The goal with the TRP is to get individuals who have no status in Canada, who are in circumstances of family violence, to get them some kind of status so that they are not removable. A permanent resident is not removable from Canada unless they've been charged criminally, in which case there potentially could be a admissibility hearing and a removal order issued. But otherwise, PRs are eligible for all the resources that a Canadian citizen would have in the country. Is that good? Sorry.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Thank you. And there's the third one as well before you carry on.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about student status?
So again, individuals who have status are not eligible for the TRP because the victims of violence TRP is for women, individuals who have no status. Right? So if you have status and you are being abused by someone in a relationship, and you want to get permanent status, then you can try and pursue an H&C application.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate the questions as we go along. It makes sense, to dig into them as I'm going through the slides. So I'm happy to receive questions. May not always have the answers, but I will try my best.
Okay, there are two more questions you want me to.
Sure, let's go ahead.
Would the same rule apply for a woman who is on study permit, left an abusive relationship, has a baby, live in a transition house, and cannot attend school right now?
Yeah, so if she has status, she doesn't apply for the TRP. She would apply for an H&C application for permanent resident status in the country.
Thank you. And the second one is, if children outside Canada manage to enter Canada prior to the final adjudication of the TRP, can they be included?
Well, that's a good question. So you're saying I think the idea is that it's meant to help those people that are already here when you submit the application.
Yeah, it looks like from the question, yeah.
Yeah, I think that wouldn't work, but let's say this individual gets a TRP, that'll give her status, and then she simultaneously applies for an H&C. She could then include her foreign dependent children in that application. Okay?
Okay, thank you. And there is another one now.
Yep.
What about someone on student permit who is pregnant and expecting, but her risk of abuse danger is back in her home country, not in Canada? Will doing an H&C application affect her ability to go back to visit her home country in the future if she later wishes?
So maybe we talk about this one when I deal with the H&C applications. I just don't want to mix up the TRP with the H&C. So can you just flag that question for when I speak about the H&C applications?
Sure, I can certainly do that. We can save this question for later.
It'll make more sense. Otherwise, we're going to start convoluting things.
Yeah, and there is another question. I don't know. She has some questions regarding divorce. Will you be able to answer today in this meeting? As you said, permanent resident status is different.
It is different. And divorce, I'm not a family law lawyer. So I wouldn't be answering questions with respect to divorce proceedings, if that was a question. And PR status is very different, right? You have status in the country.
Yeah, thank you. And that is, those were the questions, and we'll keep Shalina's question to answer in the section where it belongs to.
Yeah, that sounds good. So moving along. So how do you initiate the process, the TRP, expedited TR process? So you can request information, and here's a number. So this will be in this PowerPoint, which you all have access to. You can call the IRCC support line, and there's a dedicated abuse line as well, where you can call and get information. You can also connect to IRCC through a web form to get more information about the process. And you can inquire at a local IRCC office, although right now during a pandemic, I don't know if I don't think they're still being manned. I think you would have to use these two options here, either phone or web form. And to start the actual process, so what I just discussed here is just getting some more information. And this is starting the process, is you have to actually submit a TRP application. And you can do that through an authorized representative, which is a lawyer, to help you do the application. And again, this is for information purpose. I'm not going to go through it, just to explain that depending on where you send the request, what the officer does with it. The only thing I would say, if you were going in person, they're supposed to respond within 2 days, it says, if you've done it through local IRCC. So we spoke about the coding, right? The FV coding, that coding is essential on these files. They are a visual identifier to signal a case involving family violence. So on the application form itself, make sure you put the coding. On the envelope, on the outside of the envelope, make sure you put the coding as well, because the applications are sent to the Case Processing Center in Edmonton. If you don't put the coding, then it can sit there, right? The whole idea is to get these files flagged and out. So I wanted to just speak here. I kind of made up this scenario here about Jennifer, who's visiting from the UK. She meets Ryan, a permanent resident at a local coffee shop. They start dating. Things get serious. She moves in with him. He made promises of marrying her and sponsoring her. 2 years into the relationship, and with a 6-month-old baby girl, he starts becoming controlling. He takes her passports, monitors her calls, controls what money he gives her. He's jealous and suspicious of her all the time. She doesn't want to raise a child in such an environment and didn't know what to do because her visitor visa had lapsed. Would Ryan's behavior be considered abuse? And the only, I didn't know, Baljinder, how to use polling in Zoom. So I'll answer the question myself. I'm not sure if people, the idea is the next slide is to go through what.
I think Sarah can help us with polling. If you want to do polling around this question.
Yeah, I should have reached out ahead of time, but I just wanted to put this scenario here because I think sometimes we have the impression that abuse has to be physical, right? That there has to be police reports and medical reports and so forth documenting the abuse. And what I wanted to show in the next slide is that in these TRP applications, abuse is actually quite broad. So we've got physical abuse, including forcible confinement, sexual abuse, sexual contact without consent, psychological abuse, threats, intimidation, financial abuse, fraud and extortion. So financial abuse, I would say, when Ryan is controlling the money that she gets, would fall under that. Neglect, failure to provide the necessities of life, food, clothing, and children may also be witnessing the abuse or neglect. So I would say in this scenario here, when someone's controlling your whereabouts, who you have contact with, the money, it is financial control, it is psychological control, and abuse, and definitely comes into, this is not an exhaustive list, right? So just don't, when you have a woman come to you or an individual victim come to you explaining their circumstances, just be mindful that abuse is quite broad. And just isolating, the more isolated a person is, they may already be living in a isolated, small, remote town, and that may in and of itself constitute abuse if they're not able to speak to anyone or seek resources. So you have to be, I guess, understanding that abuse is quite broad, and I'm glad that the TRP, if you go to the CIC website, you'll see these listed here, that they are envisioning that abuse can be beyond just physical abuse or beyond just sexual abuse, that there are many different forms of abuse. So Jennifer decides to leave to a transition home. She had to leave while Ryan was at work because she's afraid of him. He told her that if he can't have her, no one else will. She wants to get a TRP and get help of a support worker. So she was never physically abused, so has no physical report. So what kind of evidence can you include to support in her application? So again, this is where I want, I guess, to leave the tool that I'm trying to have you sharpen in your toolkit is that of creativity and really listening to the individual as to what they've gone through and what their fears are, and how do you present that as evidence in the application. So again, in this case, we have no police records, we have no criminal records. There might be family court documents. For example, if she retains a family lawyer and has to get guardianship over her child, then you may want a letter from the family lawyer. And if there's a protection order in place, to through the court, then including the protection order. And then this is where you become creative in terms of, any victim assistance program out there. They can provide a letter. The Women's Shelter Transition Home can provide a letter of what services they're providing, how long she's been there. And if we don't have these because there was no physical abuse, but psychological abuse is, this is the next category here. Consider referring her to a psychologist to get a psychological assessment to include in the TRP application. And emails or text messages, so those can be very useful, where if Ryan has sent her a text message saying, where are you? I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to you if you don't return my calls, and I'm going to have you deported. Those can be added in there as well. So make it as robust as you can. Again, listen to her. If there's a friend or someone else that knows about what she's gone through, have them do a letter. But I have always found that the letters from the transition homes and victim service providers are hugely, hugely helpful when I do these applications. So the Canada Service Agents, when they are dealing directly with the victim, they're supposed to confirm a safe phone number to call back on. So I'm happy to see that in the guidelines, a safe email address. And also, if they're making an inquiry by phone or something, to get back to them within a 2-day time period was the goal. Again, this is information that's on the immigration website itself, and I'm not sure if it's been impacted by the pandemic. I would guess initially, right when things were at their hot point in March, April, May last year, when things sort of came to a standstill, it probably wasn't doing this turnaround time, but I think things are getting back on track. Very important part of this whole process, which I'm happy to see that they did, was that if there's an applicant who's starting the TRP process, the officer handling her file is told to contact CBSA to tell them to hold off on taking any further action with respect to removal. So remember, again, the silos I was speaking about before, that the CBSA work under their own mandate to remove people who have no status. So what the TRP guidelines are saying, if someone is making an application, then you need to advise the CBSA people to put a pause on removals, which is huge. And I'm really happy that that is there. Okay. So yeah, just emphasizing that.
Amaljeet, we have some questions. You want me to ask them right now, or you want to carry on with it?
No, we can ask.
Okay, there's a question on, if you need a lawyer to submit, is this accessible via legal aid?
Yes. The TRPs, they are, I think for family violence, they're still, it's still fine. Yeah, I think definitely agencies, they approve. And the family violence TRPs, I think, are fine. I think it's other TRPs, legal aid has some restraints on. So I'm pretty sure the family violence TRPs are still being approved through legal aid.
If a victim support worker is supporting a woman in this situation, can the women be referred to you directly to help her with the application?
Yeah, I mean, and we can assist with linking the woman to legal aid and getting that coverage for myself, or I have an associate to carry on and to do the paperwork on her behalf.
How and what does a woman do or get or apply for her passport when her abusive partner had taken it? Which agency would she need to access for assistance on this matter?
So if her passport has been taken away, I mean, in the application for the TRP, she would note that her abusive spouse has retained the passport. She may want to consider reporting to the RCMP that the passport has been wrongly taken by her abusive spouse, and with their assistance, hopefully get it back. because it's not been lost, it's being withheld. Right, but I would say my step would be to guide my clients through in any event saying that the person is not returning your belongings, your identity.
Thank you. That's it for now, and
Sure.
I will ask when there are more questions.
Okay, no problem. So again, I was just saying here that the pause that is put on is hugely important, because I can tell you this, well, I was involved in a 3-year project with EVA BC Mosaic and the Multicultural Family Organization. That was around, we started in 2008 all the way to 2000, and I think we did our findings in 10 or 11. And we did focus groups across BC to find out from frontline workers such as yourselves, what situations were you seeing that were hurdles for women, immigrant women trying to flee violence? And one of the key one with respect to out-of-status women was that they were reluctant to engage in an agency application or leave their abusive relationship because they were very concerned that they would be removed and deported from the country. And the unfortunate reality was that we heard of women who had called for help from the police, and when the police discovered they were out of status, reported it to CBSA, and then the women got embroiled in removal processes. And we even heard, really unfortunate stories of some of these women being deported, and they had children who were left with the abusive partner. So it was a real hurdle for these women to risk coming out of the relationship when they were out of status, and there was a real risk that they would be removed. In fact, back east, we had actually even heard of CBS officers going into transition homes and trying to get women without status. So this was a really important, ask by the stakeholders of immigration, that if you're doing this TRP, this process, and even the H&C process for family violence on an expedited basis, make sure that removals is put on pause. Because before this process was in place, a real risk for these women being removed from Canada. So when the application is started or submitted for a expedited TRP, an officer can render a decision based on just the documentation provided. So you'd have this TRP application with all your evidence of support showing the abuse and why you are saying that this individual deserves this, what is a rather exceptional way to get status in Canada on a temporary basis. So the officer can be satisfied on the application and documents alone. But if an officer is not satisfied, the officer may want to conduct an interview. And if there's no impediments for doing an in-person interview, this is again pre-COVID guidelines. The encouragement was to hold an in-person interview, but the officer is asked to take into account that sometimes it may be very difficult for a woman to come in person, such as distance, finance, safety issues. And the purpose of the interview is to establish the facts and verify the person is a victim, and use the facts to determine how long the TRP duration should be. So I think right now, probably if there are interviews taking place, I haven't had a recent TRP application. I'm guessing they're being done in some virtual format, because all the hearings right now in other immigration areas are being done virtually, either by phone or on a Zoom platform. But again, the instructions to the officers are essentially, my read is, do this when you really need to do this only, and make sure that you're not compromising the woman's safety by asking her to come in to attend an interview.
Kamaljeet, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
We're getting a little bit of noise coming in intermittently from your end. I was wondering whether or not you have headphones or something like that. Maybe we can try that out.
I can try. I don't know if I do. I have these ones, but I'm not sure if they work with this system. Let's try.
Okay. On your Zoom window beside the mic, do you see the little arrow?
Yeah.
Can you click on that and then select the headphones, the headset that you're wearing right now?
Kamaljit, I think your mic is up. So if you turn it down,
That would help, right? Does that-
yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Great.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my
Thank you.
God.
This always
That's too
happens.
funny.
Don't worry.
That's too funny. Well, at least I wasn't muted. It's just the mic is not by my mouth. That's too funny.
This is
Okay.
why we work in
All right.
teams. Okay, you sound
That's
good now.
Okay, perfect. Okay. All right. So we've talked about the possibility of an officer engaging in an interview if necessary. And so those, again, this is sort of the processing time. It was like a 2-day turnaround if you're just making inquiries to get back to you. And again, use the flagging of the FV coding to assist officers in identifying the application. So the guidelines when you go to the CIC website say very clearly that if you have status, then this TRP process should not be used until that status is either lapsed or restoration is not possible. So I just wanted to, I guess, pause here because I've been in discussions with the policy people again recently about this, because what we're seeing, and another colleague had shared with me some of her experiences, was that there seems to be an unintended consequence that those women who are with status in Canada, either visitor status or student status, and that they don't get the benefit of this expedited TRP process, which allows women to get an open work permit if they need to. And so what some of these women unfortunately are doing is allowing themselves to fall out of status so that they can get this process. So we've just had, I think it was last week, discussions with the policy people saying that we definitely don't want women deliberately falling out of status to make use of this process, that if there's another way to level the playing field. So if there's a woman on a visitor visa, maybe there's a way for her to still apply for an open work permit using the FV coding to get that. So they're going back to their people to see what can be done to help this sort of imbalance that has occurred. Again, our discussions when we were talking to policy people was really focused on women who were out of status and potentially removable and deportable from Canada. So it was trying to remedy that. But the unintended consequence that we're hearing is that there are those women that are on visitor status, mainly, that are kind of stuck then because they can't have access to a work permit. So just wanted to pause there and just say that even though currently it's saying that this TRP is only for women who are out of status or victims out of status, there are further discussions being had on that. So the next bullet point is just saying, speaking to the duration of a TRP that can be issued by an officer, and it can be a minimum of 6 months. And having a 6 months, at least 6 months, gives you that, you get that open work permit. And some of the things that they take into consideration are in giving the duration is the ties to Canada. So they may have Canadian-born children in Canada. There may be family law related matters. For example, I just saw a typo, sorry. If there is a non-removal order of the children, so that's relevant. And to give granting the TRP allows the victim an opportunity to consider other immigration options, such as an agency application, allows them the opportunity to escape the influence of the abuser. So these are the sort of things that an officer is keeping in mind when deciding whether to grant a TRP. And a subsequent TRP may be issued at an officer's discretion. So one of the ones I had most recently was for a year, the TRP. And the goal is within that time or shortly after launching the TRP application, you would also apply for H&C, and that the H&C application would be done on an expedited basis. So there is discretion, like I said here, for an officer to grant a subsequent TRP. And this is very important as well. So that's why I've given its own page here, is that if approval is given, a TRP is issued, the victim would have access to healthcare. So that, I guess, when I just paused before and spoke about, women that are on visitor's visa that have maintained their status, the difficulty is that they don't have the benefit to this, access to this healthcare, because as a visitor, you have to come with your own insurance or you pay for it privately. So we're looking into trying to level the playing field. And Baljinder, I note this, I don't know if there's new questions, but I see the number going up. Was there anything?
Yeah, there are lots of questions. I was just waiting.
Okay, all right.
Can you explain more on with the TRP application in process? I mean, if the application is sent to IRCC.
Yeah. So once it gets sent to IRCC with the coding, it's meant to be looked at right away. I think in my discussions with the policy people, the goal was like, a 4 to 6 week turnaround time with a decision was the goal. I personally, in my very first one, didn't have it happen that quickly. So my H&C, which I submitted simultaneously, was quicker than the TRP. So I've actually asked the policy people to give me some statistics. I was hoping to have it for today about how long it was taking and how many approved and how many have gone through. I know at the end of 2020, they had over 100 applicants across Canada.
There is a question on how long. I think you answered that question.
Yeah.
How long does it take for a TRP?
Yeah.
I think that question
goal was
yeah.
between like 4 to 6 weeks was the goal. But obviously the pandemic has really affected things, but I think they are definitely trying to get things back on track and get it done fairly quickly.
If a person entered Canada believing they were part of a genuine relationship through grooming, but upon arrival are trafficked, is the expedited TRP the best option for them?
Okay, so I'm assuming they entered Canada on some kind of status. If subsequent to that they are trafficked and they've lost their status, it is like if they thought they were in a genuine spousal relationship. I guess the question is that they thought they were coming into a genuine relationship and it turned out not to be.
Yes, yeah.
Genuine relationship. Yeah, because the eligibility criteria say that it was supposed to be a genuine relationship. I would say I would probably still try it because the intention on their part was a genuine relationship, which has turned into something else. There is also the TRP for trafficked in persons as well. That doesn't have an expedited processing to it though. So I think if I had a scenario like that, I would probably do alternate arguments in my application and say we're going under TRP family violence. And in the alternative, if you feel as an officer that this doesn't fall under that, we want TRP as a person who's been trafficked in. So I'd probably do a backup argument.
Thank you, Kamaljeet. Next is, would you please address one's duty to report such abuse and protecting the anonymity of such reporting?
Can you say that question again?
Would you please address one's duty to report such abuse and protecting the anonymity of such reporting?
Okay, so maybe I could get more clarification. Duty to report. So is this like a frontline worker duty to report, or I'm not?
Yeah, I can ask. Alex Peel is asking this question. Alex, can you elaborate this question a little bit?
Sorry, Alex helped share this question out in the Q&A section. I think there's a follow-up by the same person who asked this question later on, and I think it is about the duty to report. But Okay, so would we be able to touch on one's duty to report such abuse cases and also the anonymity of such reporting without compromising the safety of the victim? Does that help, Kamanjeet?
Yeah, I mean, I think you would have to have the consent of the victim to report. I guess you could, if the victim was not wanting to engage in the process, you could call to get more information, but maybe use a sort of a hypothetical and say that if there was an individual in this circumstance, would they be, what would they do? What would the steps be? And it's still not quite clear, like by duty to report, usually I'm thinking some official or some worker who's come into contact with a victim and wanting to engage the process on their behalf, but you would need their consent to do so. Otherwise, the process in and of itself is confidential. And the officers, if you go to the website, are guided on how to make sure, and I touched upon it earlier in one of my PowerPoint slides, that the officer is supposed to be careful in how they get a contact number and an email so they're not compromising the safety of the person. I'm not sure if I've answered at all the question, but I see duty to report as, like a doctor a psychiatrist maybe who comes across a patient who is threatening to kill someone, and then there's that duty to report there, right? If someone's life is in danger. So if there's a abuser who's threatening to hurt someone, that I think sort of is there for professionals if someone's life is imminently at risk to report or call the police. But duty report in this context, again, I'm just having a little bit of trouble quite understanding it, except to say that reporting to an immigration office about abuse should be done with the consent of the individual, or you could make a hypothetical inquiry.
I think we can get some more take on this question later on, and we can carry on to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Do they take into consideration for safety of the women if she were to be deported?
Yeah, so the information that I went through about, okay, so do they take into account safety of the woman if she were to be deported? Are they saying if she is removable, subject to a deportation order? Because as I explained, the whole removals process is placed on pause while the safety is being assessed and the TRP application is being assessed.
I think that's the question. Yeah, if she were to be deported, is the safety taken into consideration?
Yeah, so I mean, and I'll get into the H&C, these family violence coded applications, TRP and H&C, if they are in the process of being assessed, then removals is on hold.
Yeah, thank you. And the next one is women can work without status with TRP application. Can women work without status with TRP application?
Can women work without
status with TRP application?
Okay, so with this expedited TRP for family violence, they apply simultaneously for an open work permit. Once they get the open work permit, then they can work.
Okay.
So if they're, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah. No, so if they're out of status, without status, obviously they cannot work.
Okay.
Right, the whole idea here is we're trying to get them status through the TRP process, and this very specific TRP expedited process for victims of family violence, which allows for an open work permit application simultaneously.
The next one is, how do women decide if they should apply for TRP or agency application? Or is the one option better than the other?
So they're two very different options, right? So one is just to get her status, right? Temporary status. So it's a TRP is a temporary resident permit. It does not give her permanent status. It's just trying to make her non-removable, giving her the ability to get a work permit, giving her the ability to get health care so she can make the decisions she needs to decide. She may decide she doesn't want to stay in Canada, right? If she engages in an H&C, that is a decision by her to say, I want to stay permanently here. There's compelling reasons why I need to stay, despite the abuse, there's compelling reasons why I need to stay permanently in Canada. So the two very different immigration options resulting in very different statuses. So like I said, a woman may decide, you know what, I just need to catch my breath here, get some support, but I don't want to be in Canada permanently. So she just gets the TRP. But there may be those, and those are the ones I see saying, I need to not just catch my breath and get some support, but I can't go back to my home country. I have a child that's born in Canada. There's a number of reasons why I can't leave. So I also need the H&C. So we dual track them. We do both simultaneously.
Thank you. And the next one is in order to hold the removal order by CBSA, should TRP application be sent to IRCC, or would it be possible to ask for hold it off while working on TRP application with a lawyer?
So if there's an actual removal order in place and there's steps being taken to remove the person, usually the officers, in my experience, are pretty good. So if you're saying that we are in the process of submitting this TRP family violence, I would think that they would just sort of give you that little bit of leeway to do that. So once the application has been started, it's been submitted, then clearly the IRCC has been told to alert CBSA to stop any removals. But I'm guessing this question is sort of like a step before that, and we're just gathering the information, haven't quite submitted the application, right? And I think, you know, if the person was to come to me and there's active steps, I would probably contact IRCC even beforehand and let them know the application's in process and will be submitted soon so that IRCC's been notified.
Thank you. And the next is, what if the person reporting is a witness to the abuse?
This whole TRP process is contingent upon the victim wanting to engage in the application. I don't think there's steps in there for immigration to contact the victim and say, do you want to make the application? It really is activated by the victim or someone supporting her. I mean, someone can be with the woman on the phone and report with her there and say they were a witness. Then that witness would then, you know, we would probably get an affidavit or a letter from that witness to include in the application.
Yeah, thank you. And the next one is, if she gets TRP, does it delay the process of H&C?
No, they're two distinct processes.
The next is, if a woman fleeing violence with a 2-year-old child born outside of Canada with a work permit allowed to apply for income assistance till she gets spousal or child support or finds work.
Okay, so flag that one, Baljinder, because I'm going to talk about social assistance in a bit as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we'll answer this question later on as we are approaching to the section, but there is another one.
Sure.
There is a woman with temporary status, work visa, student visa, etc., who are at risk going through hardship, that want to stay in Canada, whose only option they have is to apply for H&C application. Can their applications be fast-tracked or FV coded too?
Yes, so I'm going to get to that next. Yes, short answer is yes.
Sure. We'll hold on to these two questions and we'll answer them as Kamaljeet is approaching to this section. Thank you, Kamaljeet.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so here we go. Humanitarian and compassionate applications. And yes, so these are applications which will give a woman permanent resident status. The application can be done simultaneous with the expedited TRP. And so just again, without making TRP status, we're talking about out of status women, doing an agency application alone will not prevent removals. Okay, but although with the FV coding, I would say it's arguable now to say that they should put a pause on it. I would be certainly making that argument in any submissions. And so I thought I had put it right at the beginning. That's why I said I'm going to answer it next, but I didn't. So these HNC applications you can put the same FV coding on them and they will be fast tracked. So I'll just give an example, one that I had done recently within, I think we had submitted it November, and by February, we had first stage approval. By March, we had the PR. So it was like under 6 months. It was very quick. And we had the flagging on there. So that answers that question, Buljinder. It is definitely, I was happy to hear that they were allowing that coding to be put on the HNC applications. And the good thing, Buljinder, and everyone with the HNC applications, if you're getting them processed really quickly. So let's say the person is someone who has status, so they're not eligible to make the TRP application because they have a visitor status or they have a work permit or student permit. If they're being processed on an expedited basis, they'll get first stage approval pretty quickly, after which they can apply for an open work permit. So it kind of works out that way at the first stage approval. So for HNC applications, though, there's a number of things that an officer is looking at. It's a bit more of a deeper dive than a TRP based on family violence, where the focus is really on the abuse and the type of abuse and getting the woman to safety out of that abusive relationship. Here, the focus is on why should the officer grant PR status on an HNC basis? HNC is an exception to the rule. Generally speaking, you're supposed to apply through other, categories. It could be express entry, Canada Experience Class, you're a student here, you get postgraduate work permit and come into the Canada Experience Class, some economic category. There's other ways to get status. Excuse me a minute. So the HNC is an exception to the rule. So it's looking at a number of things, such as hardship in leaving Canada, family relationships, best interests of the child, degree of establishment in Canada, and financial resources. I'm going to have a bit of a coughing fit. Just give me a second.
Kamaljeet, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'm yakking away here. And I'm going to quickly go through. I know it's 11:38 already, and I'm going to go through this quickly, and then we'll take questions once I'm done here. So some of the examples that you would need to show in establishing hardship is that, for example, there's children in Canada. Court orders are preventing removal of the children. There's pending charges, criminal charges, and you need to testify. You're receiving resources and counseling in Canada that are important to you for dealing with the trauma that you're going through, and there may be a lack of some similar resources in your home country. There may be an inability of your family to support you or your children should you return home, concerns of dishonor and shame if you return home, and risk to safety of being a single woman if you return home. And I've used all of these arguments in applications to address the issue of hardship in leaving Canada. In terms of family relationships, the points you can make are there's lack of family support in the home country. If there are children involved, there may be the inability for family abroad to provide support and place to stay, accommodation, the necessities of life. Again, the dishonor and shame. So some of the points you make under hardship may also come under family relationship, may come under the other criteria, and that's okay, just repeat it. And there may be a more robust family and friend and support network in Canada that you're just not going to get in the victim's home country. And best interest of the child. So this is a concept you may be familiar with from family law, but it's very much an important concept in immigration. So if children have witnessed abuse and need counseling, again, if there's removal, there's orders preventing removal of the children, that's important. And then there may still be important for the children to have some form of contact, even contact with the abusive spouse. We see in family law cases, for example, even if there is a history of abuse, even if MCFD is involved, for example, let's say the abusive spouse has alcohol addictions issues, but if they're not drinking alcohol, they're okay, they're not as a safety concern. And so MCFD and the courts may allow supervised access to the children and find that it is still in the best interest of the children to have some contact with the abusive spouse. And if schooling and supports are in place, then it would be difficult to obtain that level of schooling and supports outside of Canada. These are all arguments you would make for best interests of the child. I just wanted to quickly talk about a case which I had done for a lady and children she had in Canada and a child from outside of Canada. And we had put in an H&C application, which was refused. And it was interesting because the officer agreed that we had all the evidence to support abuse and that the mom had been abused, but felt that, you know what, just leave the country with your children to get away from the abusive husband. And the interesting facet of this was that the couple were still trying to, with the help of counseling, make things work. So it seemed as if though the officer was not happy that there was this desire by the mom to still connect with her husband and potentially compromise the children's safety. So we appealed that to federal court, and we were that's a process in and of itself and requires pretty strong arguments to get leave of the court to succeed, to get in front of the federal court. And we did get leave, and it was sent back to a different officer who decided in our favor. And one of my key arguments was that the best interest of the child was not assessed properly. So the case law for best interest of the child is you have to look at it from three perspectives. Well, you have to look at it from what would happen to the children if the parent was not removed from Canada. What would happen if the parent was removed, but the children remained in Canada? Or what would happen if they all departed Canada? And what would happen in each of those circumstances, and what would be best for the child? So that whole analysis had been missed in the case that I had successfully obtained leave to federal court on, and was then decided in our client's favor because this whole analysis was missing. So the point I'm making is that if there's children involved, there's some really important analysis and assessments that have to be done and must be dealt with in the submissions as to what indeed is best for the children. The criteria of being established in Canada, this is to show that you're either working in Canada or volunteering in Canada or involved in the community. You're making efforts to learn the language. You're trying to make roots in Canada. And then financial status, again, are you working in Canada? Show proof of that. If you're not working because you don't have a work permit, emphasize the skills that the woman has or her work history to show that she would be able to work once a work permit is issued to her. And if she's been supported by transition homes, and which is often the case, who are providing resources to the community, list that out. What you want to show is that she's not going to be a burden on the welfare system in Canada. But having said that, this is addressing, Baljinder, the question that was asked previously about social assistance. So I'm continuing on with Jennifer's scenario that She's in the transition home. She's been there for 6 months, and usually this transition home is only able to keep women for 4 months, after which they're supposed to go to second stage supported housing, and this usually requires receiving some kind of social assistance. Is there any detriment for Jennifer receiving social assistance? So in February of this year, and so these were further discussions I had been having with the policy people, saying that it's nice, that in the TRP, women without status are getting an open work permit. But I said, even with that open work permit, there are many women that just are not ready to start working right away. They need support. They need support for the trauma they've endured. They need to get counseling. So what can we do about when an agency application is filed and they get first stage approval, which I spoke about earlier, which is a letter saying, yes, we believe there's humanitarian grounds here that have been established, and you can now apply for an open work permit at that point. But that same letter also says in there that make sure you're not on social assistance, because that can be a grounds for being found inadmissible. Because the last things they're looking at after first stage approval is whether you're medically admissible to Canada, whether there's any criminal inadmissibility issues, and whether there's any financial inadmissibility issues, such as being on social assistance. So my discussion with the policy people was that we need to not create this barrier and say that women cannot be on social assistance. So now what they've done as of February this year, they've said that an immigration officer can waive that requirement, and he can put that in writing. And so the officers are instructed to understand that women may have barriers and may need to be on social assistance. They may be in unstable housing. They have childcare needs, social isolation, language skills or work experience may be lacking, and it goes on. And so I put this in detail in the slide so you have it. They may experience so low self-confidence, may not be ready to enter the workforce until they've obtained counseling. And that's exactly what I told the policy people, that you've really got to apply a trauma-informed lens when you're creating these processes for women. If they have dependent children, they may not have child support yet. The cost of childcare may outweigh working. In order to obtain some social supports, they may need to be on social assistance. So I'm happy to report that the officers are able to now waive that requirement of not having to be on social assistance. I put the link in the PowerPoint so you can get more details on it. What evidence do you need to support in an agency application? So pretty much the evidence we talked about in a TRP application for abuse, you would include the same things. But to address the other criteria that I've reviewed with you, you would want to get statements from the victim. And one of the questions that was asked was that there was a witness who's seen abuse. If there's witnesses, yes, by all means, get an affidavit or a letter from them. A letter from the school regarding the children, how they're doing, letters from employment, letters from churches and community organizations, transition homes, photographs. Photographs, I think, are hugely important, showing, for example, children engaged in the community, the families trying to become part of the community. So I guess this is where I put it. I thought I put it at the outset. Again, you can put the FV coding on these applications, not just the application, put it on the envelope. And so again, a first stage approval will allow women to get an open work permit, and then it's being processed for medical and security clearance. So once medical and security are cleared, PR status is conferred, removal orders are no longer in effect. And so with the changes on expedited TRPs, agencies are also being expedited. If, for example, an agency application is refused, you can seek reconsideration. I should have put that option in here of the officer if after reviewing the reasons you see, oh, well, the officer felt some evidence was shortcoming. Usually they don't. They put the onus on you when you're making these applications to make sure you cover everything. And so the onus is on the applicant to make sure all relevant evidence is in there. But if there's something new that you didn't have before, you can always update your application before a decision's made. But if it came subsequent to the decision, you can seek a reconsideration and send that evidence off. or you can file to federal court and seek leave before federal court. And I gave that example already of the case I did. And if your argument's compelling enough, the Department of Justice lawyer may very well consent, and you don't have to run the whole case through federal court, which is what happened in my client's case. The federal court Department of Justice lawyer consented. It went to a new officer who approved the decision. So I think we're close to time here. We actually have 10 minutes. I talked really fast, so sorry about that. So the summary, individuals, victims fleeing family violence can apply if they're out of status for an expedited TRP, and simultaneously apply for an agency which will get them permanent resident status in Canada if it's approved. So, and I've just put some further resources here and links. And Baljinder, you'll be familiar with this, like years ago, I think it was 2012, was it, when there was a conditional permanent resident category, which was then done away with. But when they created that category, they created a whole list of examples of abuse. And I always find it useful to have that and even tag it on the back of my application to say, here's a resource which describes different types and examples of abuses. So it's a good resource. So I'll stop now. I think I've done a lot of talking, and that was fast talking near the end there, but I just wanted to leave room for questions.
There are questions. I think the first two questions were answered as you was going along with your presentation.
Okay.
There is a question on, is there a different standard for adjudicating an FV agency versus a normal agency? Does length of time in Canada matter?
So, I mean, like I said, if you put the coding on there, it's flagged for, so it's different in the sense that it's flagged as a priority file now, whereas a normal agency will just go in the normal queue. If the flag is on there, the officers are instructed to pull it out and give priority attention to it. And sorry, what was the latter part of that question, Baljinder?
Let me see if I can find the question now.
Sorry.
I think the question is gone. Alessia, can you give me the
yes.
question back, please?
It was, does length of time in Canada matter?
Not necessarily, but I mean, I guess, yeah, in the sense that if we're looking in the agency application for the criteria of, are you established in Canada? So the longer you're in Canada, the more proof you're likely to have of making steps to become established. But there's no formula that, 1 year is going to get you in or 3 months is not going to get you in.
Great, thank you. And regarding the duty to report, what if the person is very afraid to report? I was under the impression that as employees, we have a duty to report. I thought I heard the answer to be, it needs to be with the permission of the person. Could you please clarify?
As far as I would understand the whole process, whether it's an immigration application for TRP or agency, because these applications are signed by the victim's participation would be required. I don't know of any unilateral process where if you call, for example, on a TRP to the IRCC, that they are going to, they may contact the victim and speak to her and share the process, but ultimately it's still up to the victim to engage in that process. I would encourage, if someone is reluctant to, the support workers, you guys are amazing out there, to sit with her and say, let's just make an inquiry together. Let's get some questions answered, and we can do that together. And then you can decide whether you want to engage in the next step, which is a formal step of making the application, which does require her signature.
Thank you, Kamaljeet. And the next is, would acceptance to TRP or HNC be contingent on the person having to prove abuse or proceeding with recourse charges against the spouse?
So no, there does not have to be. If the question is that do they have to proceed with a criminal proceeding and participate in it? No, because many of these, there is no criminal charges to begin with. There may not be. So we're relying on just abuse per se as being the foundation of the agency application and fear and all of that. But if there are pending court charges, there's no condition put on an agency application or a TRP that you are to engage in that process for sure. If I'm understanding the question, is immigration going to compel the woman to participate in the criminal process? And
I don't know, because I can ask them to elaborate on this question.
Yeah, otherwise, my answer is I've not seen anything like that in terms of a TRP being contingent upon the person engaging in and cooperating in proceedings. I definitely have seen that in TRP for trafficked in persons, that they're going to engage in cooperating and perhaps if there's prosecution against the person who's trafficked them in criminal proceedings, that they're going to cooperate in that. But I haven't seen that anywhere for the victims of family violence.
Thank you, Kamaljeet. Next question is, sorry for so many questions, but I work in higher education. So my students are international on study permit, but I have had a few women suffering violence and rely completely on their husband. What route do we take here? She wouldn't qualify for either of these.
Well, I don't see why they wouldn't qualify for an H&C. The TRP, if they're with status, yes, the person who's asking the question is correct, because currently the TRP is for women who are out of status. And like I said, we are having discussions to try and level the playing field with women who are in status, visitor or otherwise, that need to either get a work permit and need to be able to stand on their own feet. But the H&C, there's no hindrance to that student who's experiencing violence at home from getting an H&C, doing an expedited H&C application.
Thank you. And the next one is, I was referring to the standard for adjudicating the H&C, not necessarily the speed of processing. I think it's in regard to the question that was previously been asked, and we asked for elaboration.
Okay. Yeah, so the standard is not different. The criteria are the same criteria that are examined. The ones, for example, in the H&C, the same criteria are in all the applications. So the standard is the same. It doesn't change.
And I think that was all about the questions.
Okay.
If anybody have any more questions, please feel free to ask. We have a couple minutes. I know it was a lot of information. It's hard to consume this much information. Kamaljeet's PowerPoint is posted, it will be posted on the website. You can easily access it, and we will try to bring Kamaljeet back in fall once again to answer all your questions and have a elaborative discussion on the same topic. If you have any questions now, please feel free to ask Kamaljeet. We can spare some more minutes to answer your questions. And there are two more questions, Kamaljeet.
Sure.
I think the first question, it was from the elaboration, and she said she's thankful to you for answering it. And the elaboration is that if the person says they are being abused, they are believed regardless if they proceed with charges, etc. They have no obligation to go through court system. In that regard, to prove they are being abused.
So if it's when the application is submitted, and these have a quick turnaround time, whatever evidence is in front of the officer will be relied upon to grant a TRP. So if at that point it says in there that charges have been laid, then you would put a copy of the charges. And then I guess if the officer wanted to, we talked about earlier that an officer can request an interview if they want more information and they're not satisfied on the documents. I guess an officer could ask more information and say, what stage are the proceedings at? and speak to Crown Counsel as to a date and seek more information. But as to whether or not that can be a condition of granting a TRP, I don't see how they could make that a condition. I mean, ultimately, that's a matter, the case becomes Crown Counsel's case. Crown Counsel would subpoena any witnesses. If she doesn't show up, then the charges would be stayed. And would that act as a detriment? Perhaps if she's trying to get an extension on the TRP, maybe it would become an issue then. But this whole process is supposed to take place fast. And if you're simultaneously seeking an H&C, hopefully you will have got your H&C by then, and it will be a non-issue. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question correctly or not. I haven't personally encountered it, so it's hard for me to forecast exactly what they would do, but I haven't seen it as a condition like I've seen with TRPs and trafficked in women.
Thank you, Kamaljeet. And there is a question on if a TRP has been rejected for lack of evidence, can somebody reapply with more evidence?
You could. You could appeal it to federal court as well. And you may want to try and have the person reconsider as well and say, look, here's some more. Can you please look at it again? Or do it from scratch? It would have to be, I would say it'd have to be something new, though, that wasn't there before. Unless there was an error, right? I mean, if there's an error in the TRP assessment, then you would want to consider appealing it.
I think that's it. If anyone have any more questions, please feel free to ask Kamaljeet.
I will do my best to answer. If they have questions, they can contact me by email. And by no means do I have the answers to everything. And like I said, I'm constantly sort of pushing back with the policy people, trying to make it, make it even better if we can. There's always scenarios that are new or novel, or because we created this TRP for out-of-status women, not realizing that women that were on visitors visa are now not on the same level playing field, not able to access, for example, if they're on visitor visa, that open work permit in the same way as the TRP women are. But having said that, we have that expedited H&C now, which can get them that first stage approval and the ability to get an open work permit quickly too. So it's kind of working its way out. It's an area that, Baljinder, I continue to advocate in for reform. And I'm happy to say that we've got some good people at the policy table that are really listening. So that's encouraging.
I really appreciate your hard work. I know that you are doing this work from years and years now, and how much you have done. And I think it's really helpful for the participants to know from you that there are solutions to these issues. And I remember those times going back 15, 20 years when we used to have no solutions to these issues and we just have basic process in place. We have a couple of more questions.
Sure.
What about women who are on work permit?
Yeah, so I think we had that question earlier as well. They have status. So if they are in an abusive circumstance, then they would apply for H&C if they want to stay in the country.
The next question we have is, I am a permanent resident. Will these rules be same for me as well?
I think we answered that one earlier as well, that if you're a permanent resident, you have the same rights to healthcare and all the everything else that a Canadian citizen would. You don't need to apply for status.
I think, these questions are answered. I think they're showing again.
Oh, okay, they might be.
Yeah,
okay.
These are answered,
It was a real privilege. Thank you for having me again, Baljinder, and Lisa and Sarah for supporting me with the tech stuff. But a real privilege to be able to, share some information with who I think are the heart and soul and the real hard workers as the frontline workers. So my hat's off to you.
Well, thank you so much to you, Kamaljeet, for taking your time out and talking to participants. Have your patience with the questions and answers. Have your patience with each and every one of us. And most important, sparing your time for this wonderful information.
You're
Thank
very
you
welcome.
so much. And thank you so much to all the participants for today. All the PowerPoint slides will be posted. You will be able to access the materials. And please, our humble request to fill out the survey so that we can target our trainings in future according to your feedback. There will be a prize associated with this survey. We will have the draw and send the prize via mail to you or email to you. So please fill out the survey. And thank you to every one of you. Thank you, Kamaljit. Thank you, Alessia. Thank you, Sarah. And have a wonderful day to all of you.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.